Hello and welcome everybody to another iteration of CherrySTEM show, soon to be a podcast, hopefully, fingers crossed. And you can help us become a podcast by joining us on patreon.com/AnnaCherry. I would recommend checking out the Challenger tier. It directly contributes to this show, and you're also able to hang out with us after the show in the patron hangout where we talk about some special awesome things that we don't cover on air. So you have that to look forward to as well for being a patron. Not to mention that this show is brought to you by listeners and supporters such as yourself. So hopefully my co-host will disengage with what he's doing and actually join the show.
I'm here. I'm finishing up one little few sentences. not broadcasting?
Oh, it's broadcasting. I just
Okay.
want. I
We've
just
had that problem before.
did an oopsie of not having the microphone on this particular scene. So good thing I checked all that before we got started.
Okay, so now we're just now actually they're not.
We were.
Okay.
We were good when I was giving a shill for Patreon, but then the moment we switched over to our two faces screen, there was no sound.
Aha.
So they probably did not hear you apologizing for being for taking a second away from the stream to finish your email.
Okay.
So what I was also saying is that we're quite, I'm personally quite happy with the things we're going to talk about today, the way we put the show together, and we're going to try to bring you guys Brain Train as a monthly series along with two others. News Seed is one other one that we'll definitely be doing, where once a month we'll be giving you the latest news and breaking, cutting edge science and stuff like that.
But we want to do it in a relaxed atmosphere, and
Absolutely.
so basically we're inviting you into our living room to chat. So don't feel like we're in the past we have gotten like really technical and stuff like that.
Super technical.
Yeah, and so maybe we're just gonna keep it a little more relaxed and fun, and try to stay with that vibe.
Exactly. That's sort of the vibe of the new CherrySTEM 3.0. We're on our third season, episode 33. Brain Train, ketamine shrooms, and the terahertz spectrum. Is Ingress XM energy real?
Ba, ba, ba.
Stick around to find out. And yes, we really do talk about these things in our living room.
Yes.
Anyone who's a live streamer, viewer of ours on Flexstorm in particular.
They're gonna know. Yeah, we do talk about this shit.
This is what we do. So, all right. Good. We have sound. Do we have messages?
Who doesn't like to geek out in their living
can't
room
tell.
about silly shit
Right?
and real shit?
Exactly. Oh, one of the things I did mention is making sure that we have our chat up and things like that. And of course, as patrons, you not only get a chance to hang out with us afterwards and ask questions about the stream, about anything really, talk about a special news bit that we're saving up for patrons. And also, you can get priority to your comments and things like that to be read out loud. Now, YouTube thinks that the key frame frequency is wrong. I don't know what that means, but I'm just gonna trust that it's okay because we use all of these encoder settings for actual like face and game streaming that requires quite good I guess capture and resolution and all that. So I'm not really sure why it's telling me that it doesn't like it, but we're just gonna ignore it and move on right along.
Alright, I see something there.
Well, yeah, I mean, frankly, it's not going to move much aside from the event list, so people pledging or joining or subscribing, that's going to update, as well as the chat. The chat is going to update as well, but aside from that, I don't think there's any...
I think YouTube lies.
I think YouTube does lie. It says that the current keyframe frequency is 8.4 seconds, but it wants 4 seconds or less. I honestly don't know what keyframe frequency is, but as I was saying, we do use these settings for an actual live game capture, face capture. So I'm pretty sure my settings are on point, given that they're fine on Flexstorm. But
yeah, I've forgotten exactly what keyframe is as well.
Yeah, I don't even know where to find it.
We're
So
apparently coming through. I just put in a headphone, and so
wonderful.
looks like we're coming through.
Everybody must get stoned. You are right about that. Not on cocaine, but on other things.
They're just they're busting rhymes.
True.
Driving a train high on cocaine.
All right. So speaking of drugs and the brain, so let's talk about our first thing. It's pretty cool, interesting thing. Let me just make sure that I have a microphone in the next overlay. So just give me a second. All right, here we are. Perfect. So, what I would like to point you all to at the moment here, looking at the screen, we have something that won't move. Cool. Haha, there it is. Alright, so this drug, esketamine, is actually a thing. As the internet was saying, both Medium and a variety of other journalists, sort of newsletters and things like that, we had information coming out recently about FDA approving a new drug to treat depression. It was pretty big news for a couple of months, and the reason it was big news is because the drug that is approved to treat depression is actually already known street/party drug, ketamine. And they did approve a version of ketamine called esketamine, which is sold under brands Ketanest and Spravato, among others. And the interesting thing about ketamine is that it, if you use it as a party drug in a party setting, people have said it to be a horse tranquilizer or something like that. Where
I think it literally was developed.
Oh, it literally was developed.
Used as a horse tranquilizer, if I remember properly.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's the reason it's used as an anesthetic, and in fact some of you may have heard of ketamine, if not from the streets or parties, as Special K.
Or K-hole, I think that's one of the terms.
I do believe it
or
was.
Maybe that's when they're instead of tripping, you're in a K-hole is the term. I don't know.
Yes, people have talked about that. It is actually a dissociative state of hallucination, and yeah, it's interesting. We'll definitely get into it, but yeah, K-hole. Special K was what it was used in, named in the 90s, I believe. It was one of those things, or maybe early aughts. I don't know. When I moved to America, it was Special K was an actual cereal that they would advertise on TV. Yeah. But also, I knew that it was like the name for a party drug, so that was one of the first. Angel Dust, Special K, and those were like my first introductions to street jargon for drugs. So I find it kind of interesting that I've known about Special K of it. I've heard it as one of my first sort of exposures to drug culture and jargon around it. So you guys may have heard that too. Thing is, though, you may also have heard about ketamine right before it was approved by the FDA in 2019, so just this year. But right before that, you may have heard of it as well, because it was used actually as a aid to rescue all of those Taiwanese boys out of the cave. So we're going to be coming back around to Elon.
That was like, yeah.
Elon got in trouble.
Actually, most recently in my mind, we watched that This Isn't Happening comedy series we watched, and somebody just like had this whole story about how they'd go down and get like massive amounts of ketamine and ride ponies or something. I don't know. It was a weird story, but apparently they'd go down to Mexico and get lots of ketamine, and they had like a tradition with a friend of theirs or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, definitely don't look at the FDA too closely. In fact, the FDA is going to be coming back around, being on our shit list. So approving the ketamine is not necessarily a bad thing whatsoever. However, some of the other things that they've approved, such as, meth for treating children with attention issues. Or
which one is it that, I mean, it's basically...
Adderall, I think, is it?
Yeah, I think it's Adderall is the one that's like meth.
It's, literally an amphetamine, yeah. And of course, the FDA is also... that's the FCC, never mind. Close enough, but yeah, all the acronym, three-name organizations starting with F are going to be... are going to be not treated kindly by us at one point or another. We will F them up, indeed. So we're not going to necessarily F up the FDA right now, because from what I understand of ketamine, it's actually really interesting. I didn't know that much about it because there was really no reason to. I do have a book that my mom got me as like not a graduation gift, but like, hey, you're in college, here's a book, because you like those, right? And it was, I do. It was about pathology of drug abuse. I haven't even cracked it open, but...
Oh, I didn't know that was it. I put it with your textbooks. I thought it was
No,
It's the same size and like
exactly.
hardbound and everything, just like a textbook.
And I always, the reason I haven't cracked it open is because I suspected that Mom gave it to me because she suspected that I was smoking weed. And so she was like, you're getting on those drugs.
It's like, yeah, but it's like, yeah, but I'm getting
'Cause
out
there's-
of knowing exactly what they do.
Exactly. And she's like, well, if you don't, here's a fucking book. Because we do have some family history of, the Russians, there's some minor alcoholism, some other things here and there that, may leave parents fearful over their children not necessarily being able to handle addictive drugs. Thankfully, I've never done hyper addictive drugs, except weed. But,
Yeah. And you took that so far, you tested that hypothesis that it's not
Can
addictive.
you be addicted to weed? I don't know. Let's find out.
Let's find out. And yet the answer is yes, somewhat.
Somewhat, if you never train your brain to deal with situations or self-soothe or any of that stuff, then yeah, very
well,
much.
there's also like some of the things that have to do with addiction are like just
Dopamine dysregulation, oxytocin dysregulation.
right,
Yeah.
various dysregulations of various brain chemicals.
Mhm.
And so weed does, one of the things people talk about is not being addictive, and it isn't addictive like your typical addictive.
People call it
stuff.
psychologically addictive, but what does that mean?
Yeah, it's psychologically addictive is addictive. Period. And so there is a point at which
The
it
only thing
does
that isn't psychologically
push
addictive
your
I guess,
neurochemical systems. into
would
what?
be the only thing that isn't. You might want to take that out, or you.
Oh yeah.
The only thing that isn't, or the only thing that I would call physically addictive, right, would be heroin, because you get not just the psychological effect of wanting to feel normal, but you also get like an actual physical pain that
There's really putting a dividing
Yeah,
point between
no, it's-
physical and mental
yeah.
is kind of
Silly.
Yeah, it's like
So yeah, psychological addiction is addiction.
yeah, the psychological happens because the physical things, physical configurations, physical,
Oh, it's also known as cat Valium, spelled with a K,
cat Valium.
which I thought was really
Weird.
cute. Yeah, special K, cat Valium. Okay, so what it's used for usually, ketamine, is to start and maintain anesthesia. And that's actually how it was used on those Taiwanese boys, the soccer team that was trapped in the underwater caves. They gave the boys ketamine injections to be able to carry them back out through the caves, so they wouldn't be panicky. And because I'm assuming they would have to go underwater to take them out, or it
Yeah.
probably wasn't a clear way
I'll
out.
probably have
So
to take you through those really tight spaces. Oh my god! I mean, when I watch cave divers,
Oof.
I feel anxious just watching
Same.
them, where they're sitting there like squeezing themselves underwater through a tiny little tight space.
not knowing where they're going.
That kind of insanity, I just can't. I can't handle it.
No,
It's
same.
like, man, what?
I'm
And so many of these people die cave diving. I mean, like there was this guy who was like a championship cave diver. He died, and then his buddy went to go get his body, and he died too. It's like, just
and then I think a third
just
guy
don't.
went down and got them all
and finally
out.
got the two. Yeah, I think.
But the first body was not in the best state, so
No
like
kidding.
the head separated.
Oh god.
It was
Oh,
it was
God.
really gruesome.
Yeah, that's.
It was very bad.
Okay.
Very gruesome.
So yeah, I can see how they need to give ketamine to some kids that are like, being dragged through tight little holes and shit. You'd have to give me
Being
something.
stranded
Right.
for a week or so.
You'd have to give me horse tranquilizer to get me through that shit too.
Let alone children. Exactly. So most recently, before it was approved by the FDA, it was in the news as part of the rescue mission. So it's interesting what I learned about ketamine, that it's quote unquote a dirty drug, meaning it doesn't affect just one system of the brain. It affects both an MDA system. Mostly it affects glutamate. However, it is also a weak opioid, hence sedation and cat Valium and anesthesia and all that.
And that would make some sense as to how it might be addictive as well.
Weak opioid, as well as affecting the dopamine system. So it's mostly glutamate, but also a bit opioid and a bit dopamine. So it's a dirty drug.
This
it's
is
a dirty
one
chemical.
I have not looked into any of the details of ketamine.
I did somewhat. So we'll see if I can make sense of this. So basically, the way it works is one of those the dose makes the poison thing.
Mm-hmm.
In high doses, ketamine acts as a glutamate blocker. So it is a NMDA receptor antagonist, primarily.
Antagonist, really? So
Antagonist.
because
So
the way it
blocks-
blocks it is important. So NMDA antagonism. All right.
But it also acts as, to an extent, they're saying, as a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. So that's how it's somewhat affecting the
so
dopamine
then
system.
increases dopamine.
Hence
Okay.
depression. Yeah. And that would help with depression. And
Well, only while you're on it, then, though. I mean, if it's a reuptake inhibitor, that's only going to be while on it.
that's the thing. Is it
regulation?
right? But is it on a high dose or a low dose? The Wikipedia doesn't mention specifically, but on that note. But what I read is that in high doses, it is seemingly exclusively a glutamate blocker. But at low doses is where it starts to do weird stuff because it increases glutamate production in low doses, which leads to hallucinations, feelings of detachment, which is what the K-hole
In low
is.
doses?
In low doses, it stimulates globamine. Globamine.
Globamine. That's a new, we just discovered it in this show. Globamine is a new neurochemical. You're going to hear about it in the news. Oh, yeah.
Well, that's what ketamine is. It's a globamine.
It's a globamine. You guys didn't know about this.
It increases.
Cutting edge science.
It increases production of glutamate at low doses, but completely blocks it at high doses. And so at low doses,
So
that's
it must be a downstream effect. In other words, like it has a very mild antagonism effect that at high doses ends up being strong enough to
block. Right.
But then at low doses, it's probably
Just
the
enough
activation.
antagonism to create.
Well, no, not the
more.
antagonism. Just enough activation of dopamine to lead to more activity profiles because glutamate is a very general sort of activity.
But
chemical.
wouldn't you have the same experience of low level activation?
I think it's a
increasing
cascade. In other words,
density
what? No. So you got there's short-term effects and long-term
Right.
effects, right? So there's the instantaneous effect, and then there's
and
how
we're not talking
that
about
your body
receptors.
reacts to it. Over
We're
the
talking
long term.
about production. of
Right,
glutamate,
and we're talking about a ligand and how it or ligand and how
And
it.
another interesting point about glutamate, glutamate and GABA, NMDA, NMDA, and GABA. Those are the two major neurotransmitters. They're called neuroregulators.
Yeah.
Because GABA is what you actually get when you drink alcohol, and it depresses your system. It's a central nervous system depressant, which is why you have alcohol poisoning. Your lungs straight up stop moving. Glutamate, NMDA, same thing, is actually the opposite. It is an excitatory neuromodulator, and hence the MSG thing in Chinese food. The
Yeah, why it's
MSG
not such
is
a good idea.
actually glutamate. Yeah.
Exactly.
And it could lead to
Monosodium glutamate. Is
right,
what MSG
and it
stands
leads
for.
to basically excitement in your nerves, in your neurons, in your
And that's why it enhances the
seizure.
flavor of food because it's basically making the nerves that are on your tongue activate
Fire more.
and so you're basically intensifying it. But then what can happen is that overall, whenever you intensely activate something,
when you put too much,
it becomes muted.
But also, if anyone traveled abroad, you know that you can't put 220 volts through you can't
burn that fucker
put
up.
right, you can't put a certain amount of power through a wire that isn't made to handle that much power.
Right.
So actually, you do lead to neurotoxicity
Right.
and burning out of neurons.
Well,
with it.
there's something below neurotoxicity, which is downregulation, basically. So there's, so when
Isn't
something's
Molly,
activated,
isn't ecstasy also an NMDA?
I don't
Basically
remember.
a glutamate agonist. So that's one of
I
the
don't
dangers
think
of
so.
Molly is
Well,
you
maybe
can burn out your neurons because it's
excitotoxicity.
Yeah.
Perhaps. That sounds I don't know. Sounds somewhat familiar, but
see, we only know absolutely everything about the drugs that we take and the ones that we will absolutely never take. And there's some that are kind of like, I don't know, whatever. I don't trust the person who's making it. I'm not going to worry about it.
Yeah.
There's a gray zone for some drugs that we haven't tried but haven't decided to tell people to not try.
Right, exactly.
So yeah.
I haven't done all that research. I know.
Right.
I wasn't particularly happy with ketamine when I did a little bit of research on it, and I wasn't. And I
You weren't
wasn't
particularly happy with ecstasy when you did
ecstasy.
research.
And
maybe for
MDMA,
shared reason.
Right,
Yeah, so NMDA stands for non-competitive N-methyl D-aspartate receptor antagonist. Really fucking boring.
Well, not
But-
antagonist. The antagonist.
The antagonist is the
Yeah.
esketamine part, but yeah, it's the non-competitive N-methyl D-aspartate receptor, and then GABA is
Don't know.
some other
I've only known them as NMDA and GABA the entire time. I never knew what the acronyms
gamma
stand for.
aminobutyric acid.
Cool.
Cool. so so yeah. So the interesting thing with the whole dose thing is that at high doses it becomes a massive anesthesia drug, and as we mentioned, glutamate is an excitatory central nervous system.
I thought we weren't going to get all the technical.
Well, okay, sorry.
Yeah,
So glutamate's excited stuff, and then you block it a bunch, and then you're like all not excited, and so that's how it works as a anesthesia drug to knock you out.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the two ends of the spectrum. So
and then on low doses you have hallucinations, detachment, which is known as the K-hole, where you feel like you're away from your life, and that's one of the ways in which it helps with depression, because you separate yourself from the feels. And I've seen some people say that, oh, I never thought I would intentionally be seeking out the K-hole just to block out all these thoughts and not get suicidal. So it is a kind of a numbing place, it seems.
But there does seem to be some sort of therapeutic use because kind of a reset thing, right?
Right. Theoretically, the idea is that the glutamate production increase can help build new synapses. That's what they're saying. That and the dopamine reuptake inhibitor, I'm sure. But specifically, they're saying that it builds new synapses through this low-level glutamate activation.
Builds new synapses. Well, I mean,
because brains lose synapses during depression, and that glutamate goes in there and fixes them. So things that were broken down by depression.
Like, basically, it's like thinking that basically
rebuilds your brain back to normal.
Practicing thinking happy, appreciative thoughts will through long-term potentiation decrease depression, because you're building additional connections.
And this just does it for you, I guess.
And so I guess this is, I mean, if it's increasing dopamine, you're going to be in a good mood, and
so it'll maybe get to it easier to that point.
I could see possibly, but I'm still not happy with ketamine. I still think that it sounds like it's got way more potential to cause problems than it does to be therapeutic. But I don't know. At this point, I'm still definitely on the line about it.
That's perfectly fair. But yeah, they're gonna try it out. So I guess good luck, everyone.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. It was introduced in medical use in '97.
The doctors who will be prescribing it will just be taking the pharmaceutical company's word for whatever to do with it. They won't do any research on their own. The doctors will not know anything about any of what we're talking about because they just don't care. There's so few, it's like there's so few of them that give a shit to learn what the actual mechanics of it are, whether or not they never question whether or not it's good or bad. They never question whether or not it's effective or not. They just figured that if it got to them and it got to the FDA, they just trust the system, that the system will have made sure that everything's okay, and then they give it to you. So just be aware of that. That's doctors are fallible human beings, and theoretically you should be able to trust that, well, these guys are on the up and up, and we have these regulatory agencies that take care of it for us, and they wouldn't just allow us to give people poison. Yeah, they would. And so it's unfortunate that there's some doctors that are kind of innocents in that way, that they think that they're trusting a system that should be trusted so that they can go about doing their work instead of doing the work of the researchers.
Right.
And the doctor should theoretically be able to just do
and that's
their
why
work
we have
instead of having to
regulatory
do everybody else's work for them.
And we have regulatory bodies like the FDA that are supposed to be impartial
They're
and
supposed to be doing
uncorrupt
the research. They're supposed to be being reliable.
They're supposed to be scientists, not
it's like
industry
every one
plants.
of us shouldn't be having to do everything that the police do either.
Right.
We should be able to do our own jobs and be able to rely on other people to do their frickin' jobs, but unfortunately that's just not happening.
Yeah, the interesting thing though, I would say, about ketamine or esketamine versus other depression drugs, and this, I could be completely wrong, I'm not giving you medical advice, but if I were to go to the doctor, I'd be like, give me the ketamine to try first before you give me SSRIs.
I don't know.
Honestly,
well, I mean, if it's something
because
here's the thing, if it's supposed to be single dose type of modulation.
Because the interesting things about it, not only the dose thing, which is the dose makes the poison aspect of it, which is interesting, but also the fact that ketamine is used for anesthesia in high risk patients. So when normal anesthesia wouldn't work or would fuck them up or would kill them, they use ketamine in things like hemorrhaging shock, anaphylactic shock, septic shock, nerve blocks, like all of these things that you would need to have to like monitor your patient really closely and to make sure you don't fuck it up. They use ketamine versus other anesthetics. So that to me gives a glimmer of hope that maybe it's a little safer or something. But then again, it was introduced for medical use as an anesthetic in Germany in 1997.
So here's the question. If for therapeutic use, are they trying to have it something where somebody's taking it all the time, or is it something that they've used as a single dose that causes a modulatory effect that lasts long term? Because when it comes down to it, the model that helps the pharmaceutical companies is giving you something all the time that you become addicted to, and it's only effective while you're using it.
And there's two other kinds of dopamines too, ketamines. There's racemic ketamine, which S-ketamine is twice as potent as, and then there's its opposite, enantiomer, R-ketamine, and both of those are also being investigated for depression. So it's really it's a nuanced field even at this point.
The
so
chemical structure of it, but
yeah.
how it's. And the thing is, pharmaceutical companies are benefited by things that are basically addictive, and cures, which are basically you shock the system and it changes in a positive direction, and then you don't have to fuck with it anymore.
They do
because
say
it does its own thing after that point. That's something that heals.
And that may be it, because they're saying, however, in mice, they found that rapid antidepressant effect of R-ketamine, they're just looking at all the three different ketamines, right? And they do talk about it, the effect was greater and lasted longer. So that indicates to me that they gave it to them once and left them alone.
Maybe. I don't know.
Which may not be how it's being used now that it's an actual drug.
Because when they're talking about, it helps depression because of this dopamine reuptake inhibitor.
Possibly.
Okay, yeah. Any kind of reuptake inhibitor ends up making it where you don't produce as much of that chemical. So because you end up with downregulation. You become less sensitive. Let me restate that. You become less sensitive to the chemical because of the reuptake inhibitor. And so I fucking hate reuptake inhibitor types. And so it's like that's... The intent is for you to constantly be on that pill with no solution after that. You just are on the pill for the rest of eternity is basically their solution. That is not a fucking solution. That's a stopgap. It's as a stopgap, it's not. It does what crutches do, which is make you weaker. And so
I see what it is. There is R ketamine and S ketamine.
Mm-hmm.
So
and those
R
are
and
enantiomers?
S. Yes. The interesting thing here, too, now that I'm reading details about like how patients are experiencing it, S-ketamine inhibits dopamine transporters 8 times more than R-ketamine. This increases dopamine activity in the brain. At doses causing the same intensity of effect, S-ketamine is generally considered to be more pleasant by patients. Patients also generally recover mental function more quickly after being treated with pure S-ketamine, which may be a result of the fact that it is cleared from the system more quickly. This is, however, in contradiction with R-ketamine being devoid of psychotomimetic side effects. S-ketamine has an affinity for the PCP binding site of an MDA receptor 3 to 4 times higher than that of R-ketamine. So it's not just any all an MDA receptor. It's a fucking PCP receptor.
Yeah, no. PCP is an NMDA antagonist. That's how PCP works. And so it's just like how I've talked about that's what those people who are sipping on the scissor, they're basically dosing themselves with PCP.
Speaking of scissor, S-ketamine increases glucose metabolism in the frontal cortex. There's your problem right there. That alone can help so much to actually allow your frontal cortex, the part that makes decisions over your life and decides what's good, what's bad, what you should do, have self-control,
right.
All of that.
What does this?
S-ketamine increases glucose metabolism in the frontal cortex.
Glucose metabolism.
Yes, it allows the frontal lobe to actually use the fuel.
Well, but the thing is, it can just make it could be using more fuel because it's activating
it too much.
And that activation, it could be, excitotoxic. So.
And so in the long term, you actually will leave you less capable of controlling your life.
Right, exactly. It could just make you less conscious, and being less conscious overall is a happier state.
You did say that was
more of an animal. You don't fucking know what's going on.
That's literally the first thing you said when I brought up ketamine as a depression thing.
Really?
Yeah.
What's that?
That it makes you, when you're not as aware, you're happier.
Yeah. There is a pain to being an aware and awake individual, which is why people end up abusing drugs and things like that in the first place.
For sure.
Yeah.
So speaking of abusing drugs.
Okay, so was there kind of a so basically?
No,
that's
it's just it. That's it's
okay.
just a lot. I don't know.
Interesting.
It's stuff. Yeah, exactly.
So,
it's just
so
stuff.
that's
It's interesting
now
stuff.
now that it's going to be starting to be used instead of just as a party drug. Now that it's actually going to be used,
We can actually do more research on it.
Yeah, need to do more research and find out because that'd be maybe another way that people are just getting their brains fucked.
What else is new? So from there, speaking of drugs,
And then there's some good news.
Yeah, good drugs. Denver, Colorado passed the initiated Ordinance 301, the psilocybin mushroom initiative. It had
Hallelujah.
50.6% to 49.3%. Just barely made it in by
Now, talking about a
half
medicine
a percent. Half a fucking percent.
I'm talking about
Wow.
a medicine that's been used for thousands of years successfully. Because when it comes down to it, the reason why people if you look at things that people collect useful information, what's it called? Superstitiously, just like the 100th monkey effect. It is the 100 monkey effect comes from when monkeys were given sweet potatoes. Some of them started washing it. When enough of them started washing the potatoes, all of them started doing it. That's what they're talking about with the 100th monkey effect.
Yeah.
That there's basically
That's literally
a
what that
voting on new behaviors that groups of animals do. They vote on new behaviors in a certain way. It's not really voting, but it's just basically once they see that enough of them are successfully doing it, it is not harming them, and perhaps they're gaining some sort of advantage from it, then it becomes accepted as a new cultural, thing. In other words, they actually that's the way that culture sort of started first developing, capture of useful behaviors. And so there's lots of things in religion, in tribal behaviors and things like that are there's both noise and signal, because it's there's going to be things that are just superstition that don't do a damn thing that are going to be captured as well in that fashion. But there are going to be things that are valuable captured by that sort of
dragnet.
Right. It's basically how evolutionary systems develop over time, and that's why they're so messy. And but they end up eventually finding things that are useful without actually there being any intelligence behind the capture of it. It's just it captures it because it's useful in some way. So the point here is that there are medicines passed down for thousands of years, and the reason why that they're passed down for thousands of years, you end up finding out, are because they have a real impact, a real value. And one of those things is with shamanic medicine, what they end up doing. You find why it is I'm saying, okay, great. Completely in opposition to the whole ketamine thing, psilocybin. Psilocybin is something that you use.
Yeah, that's also a party drug. What's the difference?
It's not a party drug. My God, I guess some people can, but Jesus.
How?
I don't
Not
know.
mushrooms. Acid, sure. Whatever.
But why
Though
the
we
hell?
did make a mistake of taking acid during that festival, the Cooper Young Festival. Oh man, that was not a good idea. I was not prepared for that much humanity while on acid. Because to be fair, whenever I'm tripping, especially on mushrooms, my own face looks distorted. Your face looks distorted. There is at a certain point in the trip.
Yeah, that's the massive. That's the most we've ever had in the way of visual.
Well, it distorted. I mean, like just the proportions are weird. Where like the nose is bigger, the eyes are smaller, like looking less friendly. My own face.
So going back on
Yeah.
this, part of going into looking at all as she was going through her degree, in
Neuropsychology.
in
Well, it's
neuropsychology.
bridge major, but let's just call it that.
Right. The some of the things that we're looking at is the how it is that psilocybin and LSD, both of them work on a particular receptor, and so there's all this science behind anti-addictive effects of things that agonize, things that activate this one particular receptor, the 5-HT2A.
Anti-addictive effects?
Oh, wait, did I say antagonize? I meant agonize. Did I say?
You said anti-addictive effects, and I'm not sure.
Oh
what
yeah,
you're
no.
talking about.
There was LSD was one of the first things. Is that they showed how it helped with alcoholism. It helped with
And the
a variety of things.
the vets coming from Vietnam, right?
Yeah, well,
With their
you're talking
heroin
about with
addictions?
with their. I don't remember if it was specifically heroin that. You may be remembering something that I brought up a while
maybe.
back, but I'm not remembering that. So anyway, so the point is that there was lots of science showing these very positive effects of LSD. They didn't really know why back then, but there's been lots of research, and the research has been resurrected, and now the mechanics of how it works is totally makes sense. And that is, remember I was talking about earlier the idea that you something that's a real medicine is something that you take once to shock the body into fixing itself, not something you take all the time and become reliant upon. And so that's what real medicine is. Real medicine, I mean, there's nutritive medicine, which is different, where your body does need components to build from, and that's what nutrition is for, is you do have to be able to build from components. And so that's like, where the lumber and the nails and everything of your body, and a lot of times your mind, with fish oil and things like that, you need the proper fats. But when it comes to medicines that are supposed to be intervene in something that is going wrong, then it shouldn't be something that you need all the time to keep taking. That's addiction. That is, you've made your body not capable of doing it on its own. So with psilocybin, it is that sort of medicine that is an occasional reset button that is useful. And the way that it does that is what they found is this one particular receptor, 5-HT2A, that is activated by these things, is part of they find in brain slices of people who are schizophrenic, brain slices of people who have addiction, brain slices of people who have ADHD. One of the things that they share in common is too many of a higher amount of that particular receptor. And what happens when you take something that has a lot of that activates that receptor a lot? Your body reduces that receptor, so you end up with less of that receptor. So basically, if we find that unhealthy brains have a lot of this receptor, maybe and taking this thing that agonizes it makes you have less of that receptor, well, there's kind of a direct impact.
1 + 1 is.
and so they're beginning to see how it is that this impacts it. And I mean, there's all these downstream cascades and all of that I'm just not even going to get into.
So much brain stuff.
There's so much that we can get into in the technical ways.
Right.
But that's the point. That's why I'm ambivalent, maybe even a little unhappy about the legalizing of ketamine, whereas legalizing psilocybin, there's not just the thousands of years of recorded history and non-recorded history of people using it as a medicine. I mean, they thought they were curing demon possession, but the truth of the matter is they're just making people less fucking crazy by burning out their crazy.
Right, because isn't 5-HT2A also massively proliferated in schizophrenia?
Yes, that's one of the things that, along with dopamine dysregulation,
and that's,
there a lot of times in literature they'll focus on the dopamine dysregulation aspect of schizophrenia, but one of the other things that is a huge part of schizophrenia is too many 5-HT2A receptors.
And schizophrenia is a waking nightmare. You are just in a world full of demons. You see them all around you. It's literal stuff that people have in their nightmares.
They're basically stuck tripping at all times.
Yeah, but not good trips.
That's the other point, by the way.
And they're not happy trips.
So if
because
you have more
set and setting.
Yeah.
And so if you're constantly tripping and the world around you is scary, you're constantly being in a nightmare world.
Right, exactly.
Because that's one of the main things.
So the point is to burn out all your fucking crazy at once.
Yeah.
And it's and that's what is going on, is that your brain is always producing a certain ambient amount of all these various chemicals. If you have more of the receptor, you're more sensitive to it. So people who have more of the 5-HT2A receptor are more sensitive to their brain's own tripping chemical, and so you don't want to be tripping all the time. That's like
you want to be a little more dead to it.
Right, exactly. You want if there's always a reason why your brain has the ability to do that.
Right.
There's a reason why that exists, and there is a temporary
It's
state.
a system that was developed for a particular use.
Exactly. it's actually kind of for overcoming trauma. when your tribe gets killed and you've been a basket weaver your entire life and you specialize to it, at a certain point you need to completely throw away all your ideas of how the world works and be able to adapt to a completely new situation, which means you need to break down everything that you know and restart.
That's a really interesting thing about depression, is that depression,
that's part of depression,
right?
exactly.
It may actually correlate to, and then the fact that we have, prolactin increase during depression, and things that happen, it seems to break down synapses. So exactly as you said, you're breaking ties with your past because that turned out terrible.
Yeah, exactly. So that's no. And
but then you have to be able to rebuild.
Useful. There's things that they both thought were absolute truths that they hinge their entire idea of reality on that are just no longer even there. They're no longer valid. And so that's why the funny thing with the
depression has survived evolution for a reason.
Right,
in other words.
it's because it's part of a mechanism that just kind of sometimes it gets stuck and needs to get kicked. It's like a flooded engine, or there's points at which that systems that are supposed to be cycling can just get stuck in one state, and they get clogged up basically, and you have to
plunge them.
Yeah, you got to smack it on the side. Give it a good
blow
smack
it
and let it
then
it starts back up and it's going again. And that's something that you see in all of these different biological systems. It's not you shouldn't be doing things that are constantly supplementing you. Like you shouldn't be a person who's that's one of the great things about what we see in other types of medicines, where you don't want somebody to always be on crutches. If they stay on those damn crutches, they're going to destroy their ability to walk. There's a time they do need it. They need the fucking crutch when they just broken their leg.
Yeah, because their injury is going to get so much worse if they don't.
If they keep walking on that broken leg, they're going to fucking destroy it. But there's a point at which you then also have to push them. Okay, now it's healed enough.
Because the crutch will destroy you.
And then the crutch will destroy you. So it's like not having the crutch will destroy you at one point, and having the crutch will destroy you at the next point. So there is this, there is a kind of a procedure of.
It's a moving balance, like an active.
Yeah, and it is situational. So that's so it's not it's not an easy thing to do, and that's why I think it's very important to have controls on psilocybin, so that you have and things that are that are these interventions. They do take some professional knowledge and understanding of the situation to be able to apply it properly and not just willy-nilly, and so I do believe that it still needs to have some sort of professional oversight in the use of these things, but
setting alone is so important that you absolutely would need a retreat doctor type environment where what they provide you emotionally can help you through the trip. Because,
absolutely. Your emotional, because that's one of the things, like whatever you're thinking about a lot. Oh, that's the other thing that I've noticed is that I think that one of the things that when they're using this, when they start to develop this therapy a little better, they need to be aware of the possibility of excitotoxicity, because that's part of what happens with the use of these strong agonists. Is the possibility of excitotoxicity.
Especially with esketamine.
But the thing is, excitotoxicity by itself is not necessarily a bad thing. There's I believe the brain uses excitotoxicity to how is it that you delete information in your brain? There are times when you find out something is wrong that you need to delete the information.
Right.
You
need to break those synapses, or
and so there's a certain point. I think that your brain actually uses excitotoxicity sometimes to delete information that is faulty. But then, think about how much, if you just delete a vast swath of information all at once, then you're talking about way too much a destabilization of the system.
So you're saying it would be useful to have a guidance, almost like a cognitive behavior, like a cognitive therapy to go along with the physical.
Well, it's just like I love the metaphor kind of. I like the use of stories and things like that to represent in general more specific.
We love a good story.
Damn right.
Tyrion.
With the Matrix, they have him like, oh, he's too old. He's gonna pop. And how he's like when he first gets exposed to the idea of the Matrix, he's like puking and and the truth of the matter is that there is some truth to that. Where I believe that extremely religious people who have a particular belief about the world and things like that, that if they were exposed to proof that their particular religion was wrong, that it actually might harm them. It might really, really genuinely damage their well-being. And so that there's a certain point at which that it would basically, they'd have to delete too much, because there's so much data that's dependent upon these basis, things in truth that are represented by actual structures in the brain. This information is real structures, and if you're going to delete it because it's wrong, then where the fuck does all that dependent information go? Well, if it's dependent, it has to be deleted. And then if everything in your life was dependent on these certain
Concepts,
basic truths and concepts and all of it, then basically you end up with this cascading deletion, sort of thing that can totally just fuck you up. So it's like,
but at the same time, something can be said for the therapeutic effect of tripping, where you actually see what it is that you've been holding back this whole time, and all the torrents of emotion and pain and all of that you've been carrying, and you're like, oh, I should probably let go of that.
Yeah. Well, what's
probably
neat
a similar
is the
mechanism.
tripping state. Basically you have a lot of activation all throughout the brain. So what you're doing is, by simultaneous activation, you are examining concepts from angles which are not stereotyped. In other words, you're comparing
You're looking at
information
all of it at once.
that you, under your normal circumstances, would never compare because they are theoretically unrelated, in your opinion. But then you may see relations between information
opinion
and
is important.
experiences.
Opinion is somewhat important because what we believe is related, that's how the brain activates, but at the same time, not always, because we do have evidence that when a person is given a word bird, they think of like every possible iteration of that word, including a woman in British slang, every single bird type, big birds, little birds. Last time they heard the word bird, all that happens in a couple of milliseconds until it all collapses into whatever the proper context is for that conversation. But for a split second, all that's related to it does light up. But some of that may be...
Yeah, what's funny is you haven't been following any of the conversations and the foundations of mine.
Nope.
But what you just described was part of a major thread that we were talking about with semiotics. And
You
how
say that to me like
all the
once
time.
a week
Yeah.
or so. Somehow we're on the
talking
same
about
wavelength.
how the brain and language are related, and how there's these things about the way that context refines the meaning of something down from all those possibilities down to one specific thing. Like the word bird, it does relate to a lot of different things. How like a bird is a woman in British slang, but it can be these other things. And there's a lot of words that are ambiguous like that, and how we reduce that ambiguity down to a finer point is very important in the way that the brain works. So it's just it's funny that you ended up, because that was part of an overall discussion on the emergence of consciousness and how difficult it would be to create AI because of all of these things that go into refining context.
So yes, while we do talk about hard science, that is both of our degrees, we are extremely esoteric people. Yes, quite. We are Gnostics, in fact.
Yeah. So
Mushrooms.
Do what?
Mushrooms.
Mushrooms, yes. So I'm very happy about the psilocybin thing. I sure hope that they start, because the one of the things that they only really approved it for before was the use with people who are dying. They end up basically having a much more peaceful and fearless passing. In other words, people who are terminal, that they've found in study after study that the use of psilocybin, and they end up making peace with their surroundings. A lot of times they have, if they are religious, they have religious, what's it called? A religious event, a religious experience. And they, in one way or another, either if they're completely secular or if they're religious, basically they're able to combine all their memories and ideas to find some sort of peace.
They find themselves one with everything.
And that's because a
way or
lot of the
another.
crazy has to do with ambiguity, too much ambiguity and conflict in your own brain. I believe that
So
that
not
the 5H,
or
5HT2A receptors are representative of doubts, because you have to maintain, when you haven't made up your mind about something, you have to maintain multiple alternative ideas about something. And so how is it, where are those points marked in the brain of how you have all these multiple ideas that you're still maintaining?
So let's say you have you have the what are they called? Not thresholds, but probabilities, likelihoods. You have let's say you have a big this is my metaphor. You have a big box of facts, note cards, and you're pulling them out and you're stacking them into different piles and around this topic, and so you're not sure which one of these, and so while
Right.
you're
So
stacking
this one
them,
is
you have to.
this one's
Right.
probable, and this one's probable, and there's not enough data
This
to
one's
really
like
make up your
75%.
mind.
This one's 50.
And
this
then-
one's 30.
And then basically, what with the activation, you end up being able to take information from elsewhere that you have all of these probabilities and start comparing them at various levels, and then by doing so, you're able to kind of make up your mind about certain things and say, okay, I'm gonna make a sort of decision. I can revisit this later, but I can kind of rely on it now because it's closer. It wasn't like this 50-50, and now it's more like 90-10, and so now it's a more reliable thing that fits better with all of my other beliefs, because you end up having, when you have all these different alternating beliefs that are kind of in conflict with each other, you end up having a mind that is kind of disjointed and incapable. You can end up having indecision lead to more indecision, lead to more indecision, lead to more, so you're completely indecisive about every fucking thing. And if you can at least get back to kind of a middle area where you're saying, okay, now I've kind of got a system that overall agrees with itself from a wide variety of angles, because you've taken out a lot of those doubt points that are represented by those 5-HT2A receptors. I think that that's part of the kind of the mechanics of how it ends up leading to that sort of peaceful after effect, is that you kind of make up your mind. You say, it's like, okay, I've looked at all this information, and while I was tripping, I was thinking through all of these various doubts that I have, and I've been able to make a decision. I've been able to come to something kind of stable, and it fits with not just this little tiny area, but it fits with my beliefs over here, and it fits with my beliefs over here, and in all these different places. It makes a bigger machine that is more coordinated and less in conflict with itself. And because we all have to have, you can't just make up your mind about everything all the time. You have to maintain some level of doubts. But I think that that's when you get into this analysis paralysis point where you haven't made up your mind about anything, that can start cascading into just massive, more and more doubts in more and more places, because none of them ever.
It's like a fabric unraveling. You pull one string and
so
somehow all of it was contingent on
because
that.
all of it's based on doubt. Each one of them's like, oh, I got doubt here and here and here and here. And basically everything that I'm looking at right now, I haven't made my mind up at an earlier point. And I haven't made up my mind at an earlier point from that set of information and from that set of information. And so you just be, I think that's the way, fractal doubt. I think that is what ends up making the unhealthy minds, is all this doubt. And I think that's why religion has typically performed a function.
Had such a death grip on it.
Well, no, it's performed a function of stability.
Yes.
Is that people had a way to a rubric by which to say, I can just make up my mind automatically. I don't have to have all this doubt. I can make up my mind automatically because that doesn't fit with my religion. Period. Poof. Done. Now I'm certain. And I don't have this feeling, this
and the religion
grinding
itself,
in my gut about what's real, what's true, I just have this basis by which to go.
Right, and that's what religion provides. It provides a basis of certainty about your existence.
And so that's the way in which I think that various belief systems can be thought of as religious, because they are basically they're a worldview basis to explore from, and to because you do want to go out and look at those things that are doubtful, but you need to have somewhere that you can back up to, something that you can compare to. I think that's how that whole system ends up working together.
Cool. And the thing I wanted to add to the drugs aspect of it is that a lot of why are we talking about why did FDA have to approve ketamine? Well, that's obviously a proof. FDA has to approve it for a medical setting, but why was it like a drug, and why did we have to legalize mushrooms? Like, what is happening? Why is this all a thing? Well, I don't know how many people know that there's this thing called Schedule 1, a classification of drugs as schedules. And Schedule 1 drug, it's drugs that include substances that are not recognized for medical use, and that the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, defines as having a high potential for abuse and dependence. Weed is a Schedule 1 drug. Psilocybin's a Schedule 1 drug.
Yeah, that's just so ridiculous.
It's patently false.
Unfortunately, our regulation agencies don't have people who have any knowledge of neuroscience making
They do,
policy
but,
about.
no, they do, but those aren't the people funding the policies. Those aren't people funding the candidates who are voting.
No, a lot of times they
So-
don't. They don't though. No, they seriously
Oh.
have people who are just rando off the street making decisions
That's true, too.
about scientific subjects.
Who then never read what it was even about in the
Right,
first place.
and so that's how they have it at Schedule 1, because
Yeah.
just the mildest education in neuroscience, you wouldn't have it at fucking Schedule 1.
Yep, exactly. At
Just,
least
just
Schedule
the
3.
tiniest
Too
bit
maybe.
of information.
Yeah.
It's like,
So good on Denver, and then of course the article that got passed. It was, as I mentioned, 49.36% to 50.64%. So just literally 0.5%. But that's 90,000 people versus 87,000 votes. 90,000 votes versus 87,000 votes. So it's still a lot of votes. But
Yeah.
when you look at the percentage-wise, it's just such a tiny, barely made it, man.
yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, and the purpose of this article is to A, deprioritize to the greatest extent possible imposition of criminal penalties on persons 21 years of age and older for the personal use and personal possession of psilocybin mushrooms, and to prohibit the city and county of Denver from spending resources on imposing criminal penalties on persons 21 years of age older for the personal use and personal possession of psilocybin mushrooms. So, possession and use. Growth may be another issue, but
Yeah, I think that
but I mean, if you grow it and possess it, that seems to be the same thing.
yeah, they definitely need to decriminalize it, and that will lead towards more ability for
Research.
doctors and things like that to eventually start using it as a therapy.
True too.
I mean, it is a little worrisome, because there are times, like for instance, if you solidify your beliefs around something, you could say you're in a cult
I
at
was
the
about
time,
to say.
and if you're in a cult at the time that has just
What if you're a
outlandish-
Scientologist or something,
right.
you know, like,
and then you solidify your belief systems
or a feminist,
and get rid of all your doubts, and solidify your belief system around something like that,
Yeah.
then that's not necessarily good.
Right.
You'll probably be happier overall, but your belief system in the
But
on the long term
right,
could
so-
really lead to some.
right?
some
Are we talking
negative
about
effects.
happier in a year or in 10 years?
Right, exactly. So.
So of course, even something as amazing as that we're all for as this.
Oh, and then one of the
has
other things I've got a
possibility.
problem with is whenever people, it's either 100% good or it's
Oh,
100%
right.
bad.
Like weed, it's like no, it's both.
Yeah, no, there's both
There's
negatives and
potential
positives.
for
like one of the
abuse.
things, and then the other thing that's really been bothering me is all the microdosing. It's like psilocybin
yeah.
microdosing, it's the best. Yeah,
No,
hold on.
no, they do LSD microdosing, not psilocybin, I don't think.
Well,
Or they
LSD.
probably do all of them.
They probably
to
do
be
both,
honest.
yeah.
But
But either way, microdosing
Ugh.
is good for if you're hyper
depends on what you
conservative.
want to do.
If you're hyper conservative, it would probably be good for you. If you were hyper liberal, it'd probably be very bad for you. And that's the thing is, when you're closer to the pedantic and not particularly creative, then expanding your creativity slightly by adding a little bit of doubt in your super strongly held beliefs, and therefore being able to look back at them and say, well, maybe I should re-examine. That's a good idea. But if you're already somebody who has a tremendous amount of doubt in a lot of various things, and you're maintaining just huge amounts of doubt, increasing that in doubt, it would be a very bad thing. So microdosing, here's the thing, what I'm talking about here is that microdosing is a methodology, which one of the things that you have in receptor densities is that, sure, acute doses downregulate the receptor, but low doses of things can cause something called desensitization and upregulation. So what happens is, because there's a low dose there, your brain will go in the opposite direction,
They'll get numb to it.
more the receptors that are there, instead of completely reducing them, it detects that there is a need for a higher amount being there. What I mean by this is that the way that homeostasis is maintained is by relying upon certain things upstream occurring.
Well, it's like when you're
and
constantly.
then so certain adaptive strategies are what your cells respond to. And one of those adaptive strategies is, if there's a constant amount of this
Right, there's a bunch of
neurochemical
flies
around,
flying around you. You're going to
in
create
a small amount,
more things to catch them.
in a small amount, well, then then that means that the system needs to adapt to this new level that is just a little bit higher, which is kind of within the way that's within the range that your brain would normally be producing chemicals. So microdosing is a lot more like mimicking what your brain naturally does. And so therefore, if you've got microdosing of 5-HT2A agonists, which are the LSD or psilocybin,
Right.
then your brain's going to upregulate those receptors. And so you end up with more of those receptors that when you have too many of them,
The thing that makes you crazy?
or make you crazy. So the thing is, yes, I think that there are certain people who will increase their
Creativity.
increase their creativity, because there are people who are very, let's be honest, as a programmer and as a Asperger's, I was basically robotic as a child. But then as I got older, obviously I increased my levels of doubt about things, and were able to overcome certain completely
Handicaps.
static and basically like a handicap, which is you end up more like a computer. You can memorize and regurgitate information at an astounding rate, and you can access those and bring it back up like a computer. But a computer doesn't understand things. It doesn't have that thing that makes us greater than computers. And that has to do with our ability to doubt, and it has to do with the way in which we collate information. But
It's funny
I
you
won't
mentioned
get
that
too much
because,
into that.
well, no, as Egregious Charles mentioned, there aren't those people that are making decisions in the schedules and all that. They're not average. They're actually specifically selected to be able to work in a bureaucracy. So
Right.
robotic,
So, yes,
in a way.
being robotic, is very useful for computer programming, for mathematics. Being extremely good at robotic.
Part of a bureaucracy.
Robotic sorts of stereotyped behaviors, repetitive stereotyped behaviors, being able to do them very automatically. I used to be a machinist as a kid. My family was, and so repetitively doing the same job the most efficient possible way,
And the best,
over and over
like,
and over and
accurate
over
way,
for hours
too.
and hours on end, standing at a lathe. That's something that I was very good at. I was extremely good at that. But there's a
Sounds like
so there's
my
a
worst nightmare.
there's a value to but that is offset. And so the thing is, yes, there's a level of creativity that is missing when you're not capable of when you're there's just this balance between analysis paralysis and efficiency. And you go too far one side or the other, and you end up with disability. But the
Right.
disability comes with a great strength as well.
Right.
Just like being fully autistic. You can be an autistic savant and be able to, do these amazing things with your brain,
Feats.
and also be completely limited in other ways.
Mhm.
And so there's a level of balance that I think that people microdosing, if they are very pedantic, I think that those people would end up being more creative, and it would grant them some value. But the people who are more creative already, and therefore they already have a lot of noise. So it's like people who are pedantic have they have a very clean signal. They're
Mhm.
really
Strong,
good at making
clean,
sure
yeah.
that they don't have faulty information. Very
Mhm.
good at that. They miss a whole lot of the new information that would be more valuable because they're not willing to risk
Right.
that having noise in their
Uncertainty.
signal. And then there are people who are willing to have just tons of noise to get every last drop of signal. They want all the signal, and they end up with just shit tons of noise in there with it. All these faulty beliefs and stuff like that. And so that's part of that doubting brain sort of perspective. And so those people who are already quite creative, who already are making these connections between things that aren't necessarily true, then those creative people, I think, would be damaged by
Mhm.
microdosing. And so it's just understanding this that there is a
What brain type is taking it?
what brain
Right.
type is taking it. It's not a pure good. It's not
Right.
it's not a pure good, and those people by microdosing would be harmed, but by megadosing, which is the acute agonism that would downregulate, they would probably be made more stable. More basically, they need to be brought more towards the pedantic side,
Right.
more towards the cleaning up the signal.
Like
You
all
know.
the feminists. So were you like Rain Man?
Maybe a little. But
That's not Asperger's. That's full on autistic spectrum.
yeah, that's
where
full autism.
autistic
I don't-
savant.
I don't know. I might have been.
I feel like you're a bit of a
fully,
savant.
Yeah, I may have been almost fully autistic when I was very young. Actually, I mean, it was pretty extreme. People.
You have savant abilities when it comes to understanding though.
Right. So, but I've changed so tremendously.
Yeah, you are socially. You are.
I'm unrecognizable from my childhood self. I mean, it's.
And
As a
because-
matter of fact, my childhood self would have thought that I'm a really bad guy.
the funny thing too is that how awkward it is now for people to understand that, because you have changed so much. You are so charming and, you know, socially fluid, and
That's hard fucking work, man.
that nobody would ever guess that you're actually truly a nerd, and like, you know, because you don't look it and you don't act it.
Yeah, well, I used to.
So.
I still act it quite a lot. I mean, but
Well,
now it's
not-
purposeful.
not
Now
in
it's like I don't
social-
give a fuck.
right.
Fuck you if you don't like that I act nerdy. it's
But-
kind of
but-
like, yes, I know that this kind of turns you off to a certain extent, and I don't give a great big flying fuck.
Well, one thing is talking about nerdy subject. Another one is acting nerdy. You don't act nerdy. That's the thing. You don't realize how. Well, I mean, you probably do, but you are extremely charming, smooth individual when you're talking to people.
I suppose.
They don't have any idea that you're not one of them. You're not a socializer.
It's just if I decide that I want to be, if I
True.
decide I want to look that way,
That's
if
very
I
true.
decide I want to have that persona where I'm fitting in with that sort of.
Well, that's
group,
what I'm
then-
talking about.
Then I
That
suppose
usually
I can.
one-time
I
interaction.
just
you know.
really dislike that.
Yeah.
I just there's just a.
But it is part of a necessity of our job in meeting people, recruiting people. You know,
Yeah, to a certain extent.
to not necessarily our job.
I still
job,
hold
but-
the line and drag people towards being
Yes.
okay with being more nerdy, more geeky, more realistic about humanity, more, and that's because it's basically a more truthful, real.
But you do it in
sort of-
such a sexy, charismatic
Well,
way.
thank you very much, Betty. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I mean, yeah, people don't like it. They're like, why are you making my brain hurt? I don't want to think ever. But they somehow still go along. You silver-tongued devil.
Oh, yes, terrible person. No, I just try to tell the truth and try to help people see my perspective. And a lot of times I try to keep a perspective that is looking at all the various things. And whenever anybody wants to doubt me, I'm immediately, yes, please doubt me, ask me, challenge me, let me.
Oh,
fucking
that's
answer.
not a socially powerful position.
No, it isn't. Yeah. Oh, being doubtful, allowing doubt. No, that's not socially powerful at all. But anyway,
Speaking of socialness.
we had some other topics we were supposed to get into here, right?
Totally. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Alright.
So
Cool.
yeah, going from the brain and the drugs, let's go to a bit of what would seem like tangent.
A tangent? Yeah.
But
I don't know.
We
Oh,
shall
it's-
bring it back around.
Yes, no, it's definitely connected.
Yes. So here we are, Starlink mission, motherfuckers. However, it's actually not. We're waiting for SpaceX May 16th. So the live stream is actually not live. It should have been on the 16th. But if you go to spacex.com/webcast, you will be able to see the Starlink mission blast off, lift off, all of it as soon as it goes live. The reason it's not live right now, SpaceX is postponing our launch of 60 Starlink satellites, and they're going to do that 7 times to have a base of 420 satellites in space, which is just the base number that they need. Eventually, from what I heard, it needs to be about 15,000 or so. But Elon is known for his 420 tweets ever since dating Grimes. So Internet Today brought this up, that that's a
That's
cute
funny.
little, 7 launches of 60 satellites. So they're doing their first one. And they're saying they're postponing the launch to update satellite software and triple check everything again. Always wanting to do everything we can on the ground to maximize mission success. So,
And
they're
so
not live right now.
let me introduce a segue here.
Sure.
So, conspiracy
But we
theorists.
can talk more about Starlink mission in a second.
There's a crossover between disinformation people and conspiracy theorists, and that is that there is always a little bit of truth, little pieces, little fragments of truth tied up in a conspiracy theorist narrative, and there's always you mix truth with lies to create disinformation, and so there's and being able to get them so close that you can't separate the noise from the signal tires most people out, and basically they just go to the more I'm not going to introduce the possibility of being wrong by examining that information and possibly gathering something that is false. But then there are people who are a little more schizotypal, a little more willing to risk that noise, and that'll go after it, and then they a lot of times will fall prey to disinformation. And so there's this crossover between the two that is an interesting area that is dangerous territory. But so long as you don't take it too seriously and know it's just you're more likely to end up wrong than you are right, and it's just you're doing it for fun, exploration, creativity, and just kind of as for funsies, then you'll probably be more safe, and you'll end up seeing in retrospect after people finally sort out. It's like, oh, that ended up being true. Well, that's cool. That one little piece of all that other bullshit, because there was one little piece of truth mixed in with just 10 tons of complete and utter bullshit. Cool. And you'll see it in retrospect, but you can't ever really feel bad that you didn't know beforehand that was truth when looking at all the bullshit, because it's just sometimes it's impossible. There's just too much. There's not enough information available between the false information and true information. So, with that said, we're gonna go along and talk about some of the things that are a little more separable first, and then maybe some of the things that are not, along lines of conspiracy theory. Like one of the things that you may have heard is this 5G is going to melt your brain, and I'm going to tell you that there is a piece of truth to that conspiracy theory. So go ahead. You were going to talk a little bit more about it. So before I go off on that tangent.
No problemo. That's really not much more to it other than the fact that Starlink, I just kind of wanted to throw in, even though we're not doing Newsfeed, but we did skip a couple of weeks due to a variety of events. So I just wanted to throw in a recent news that is related but not directly. So what's happening is with the Starlink Commission, and this is part of the press kit that I'm looking at right now. So when you guys go to the SpaceX.com, you can watch the launch below, starting about 15 minutes before liftoff, and find out more about our mission in the press kit. So here's the press kit. Basically what they're doing is they are launching 60 satellites that are going to have, let's see, Starlink FAQ, KU, or K, what does the lowercase u called? Umlaut in Latin?
What are you talking about?
KU bands and KA bands, but the U's and the A's, they're like the special, like, uTorrent. That's it. There'd be
nano, micro, things like that.
Right. Yeah. So they're talking about, I don't really know what it means, but KU bands and KA bands, and these are wide broadband frequencies that are being used, and the bands that are being used is the KU and the KA, but I don't know if it's actually U and A. It may be like umlaut and alpha. I don't know. So these satellites will be 10,000 to 12,000 gigahertz. Others will be 17 to 19 gigahertz. Others will be 14 to 15, 27 to 30. So it looks like the biggest gigahertz number that they're going for is 30 gigahertz for like the satellites, the uplinks, and the things. And why are they doing all of this? What is all of this? Well, they're going to be launching a bunch of satellites. Wish there was an image of it, but yeah, a lot of satellites around the Earth, and that will cause a network, Starlink, a network of satellites that will bathe Earth in broadband.
How many gigahertz? What was the highest?
The highest is 30.
30, just 30 gigahertz,
just 30.
Or 30,000? What did you say?
Well, it says 30.0. So I'm assuming
just 30 gigahertz.
I'm assuming it's just 30. I don't know why I said 1,000. The dot fucked me up. In Russian, the dot is the comma, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened. Yeah. So the biggest one is only 30.
Okay.
Yeah. So standard, not a big deal. So this isn't a problem. Like there's nothing wrong with Starlink. For some reason, I felt like there's that I conflated two different stories, and so I was just searching the internet, found this awesome Reddit. In the Starlink subreddit, where they give all the information, the exact broadband, the exact frequency, everything, and I was just poring over it to try to figure out what is the problem here. There is no problem. Everything's fine.
Right. So
Starlink is going to give the world internet. Amazing.
That's great.
I'm so happy about it.
And now I'm going to tell you what's potentially wrong with it.
So. Here we have an article from Network World that says, oh, hey, like 5G is great and all, which we don't currently have 5G. We have 4G, that we're on our way to 5G. And they're already saying, hey, yeah, that's great and all, except for the fact that it isn't, because terahertz will provide more bandwidth than the gigahertz. The 5G doesn't mean, the G doesn't mean anything, the 4E, 3E,
Yeah, it's just
5G.
a naming convention.
It's just a
that
naming
they're using,
convention.
and that's- yeah.
But just so happens that we are talking about going from G, gigahertz, to terahertz. And that's the problem. And so, how does, oh shit, I'm sorry, what are we looking at? How terahertz waves tear apart DNA? I'm sorry, how is Network World telling us that terahertz will provide more bandwidth, that researchers say that 5G won't be able to accommodate the growing demand for bandwidth?
And there's a bunch of articles about this.
Terahertz frequency network will be the better option. But right here, MIT Technology Review says the terahertz waves tear apart DNA. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, and there's tons and tons of articles about exactly how terahertz does tear apart DNA. So here's the thing. So that's basically what we're looking at now, is that 6G, if we allow it, will be fucking terrible. And on so many levels, it's hard to describe. And why is it that that there's this one specific frequency range? Like, why is it that if we just go up, in a frequency range, that suddenly things are horrible? Well, I mean, to put it simply, you know that purple light isn't going to really hurt you, whereas UV can damage you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it has to do with resonance. There are certain frequencies that resonate with DNA, that resonate in a certain way. So here's the thing. The 5G networks that are going up right now, one of the things that they were able to do is they were able to use current equipment to be able to get to certain gigahertz ranges already. Then they have to upgrade the equipment. So one of the things that they're doing all over Sacramento, where 5G is being implemented, is they're upgrading the equipment. Whenever you upgrade equipment, if you're smart, you make sure that you upgrade it so that it is useful for the future.
You future-proof it.
Not just now.
Yeah.
So therefore, this means that all of those networks that they're putting up in Sacramento and anywhere that they will be putting up 5G networks, including, and I would assume, including in the satellites, is the capability to produce terahertz. Because anybody in technology, and anybody and everybody in technology is saying the next thing is going to be 6G. Is what some people are calling it. And that is terahertz. And the problem is that the people who are in technology are not looking at biology. And in biology, there is just tons of evidence that terahertz, it will fuck you up in a variety of ways. Why will it fuck you up? The best way to describe this is that one of the things that has been talked about a lot in one of the groups I frequent is called Froelich coherence. And the best way I can describe this is, well, first off, there is something called a Bose-Einstein condensate, where basically you have a collection of things that once they resonate at a certain frequency, they act like a single entity. And so basically you're creating new borderlines on something. And if you think about, I'm gonna have to hit a couple of different things here, so bear with me in a second as I kind of assemble this from various other concepts so you can better understand it. And that is, so you know how when you an opera singer can reach a certain frequency to make a glass break. That's because she's resonating it. So basically, energy gets stored and is not released before that object flexes so much that it overcomes the ability for it to flex, and so you can shatter a wine glass with your voice. If you hit the right frequency and the glass is thin enough and is shaped in a way that can store the energy that you're pumping into it with the frequency of the sound that you're producing, so that it will overly flex and then break apart. So that's simple enough by itself, but in biology, biological molecules are very complex in their shape. So something that we've only started to really understand fairly recently is the concept of quasicrystals. So in crystals, which are basically things with a regular structure, it's easy to use resonance to pump something full of energy and make it output something of very high energy. That's kind of the principle of how lasers work. And so dealing with just regular crystals, that makes sense. But something that isn't very regular in its organization until recently, we didn't realize there's something called a higher order regularity. So in quasi crystals, this is like one of my favorite examples of a quasi crystal is the let's see, a Penrose tiling, and so basically it's semi-regular, and then that if you look at it, well, only a few pieces of it, it looks like it's, you know, it's got these particular shapes that it's made of, but then as you start to assemble them, those shapes can't repeat because it's a five-sided figure. And so they can't just have a repeat like a square grid. A grid of just squares is infinitely repeating. So you can place one part of it over another part of it, and that's why you can set up resonance in it. You know, it's very easy to set up resonance in it. You can set up resonance at lots of different frequencies in it. However, in a quasi crystal, you can only set up resonance at particular frequencies because there is a type of regularity that happens at a higher order. So if you want to look into this yourself, one of the best ways to see this is called quasi-crystal diffraction. So there are these patterns when you send light through a crystal, for instance, then you can get this diffraction pattern that is regular, that is produced from something that is only semi-regular. So the point here is to understand that there can be these patterns of things that look like they are non-regular that have a hidden symmetry. And these hidden symmetries exist in biological molecules. So there's something called Froelich condensation, where you can actually create something that's like a Bose-Einstein condensate in biological molecules, and we actually see this happen in some brain cells and things like that. There's these interesting patterns that we're starting to discover can occur in biological molecules. One of the other things that we've discovered that can happen in biological molecules is you can, with DNA, for instance, you can do that wine glass trick. You can find something to cause it to resonate and cause it to shatter. And because you're basically creating borders where there should not be ones, then pumping in energy until it can no longer flex, and then it rips apart. And so that happens with terahertz frequencies, with DNA, with biological molecules, and there is this interesting use of terahertz even in the brain, where we find that they're like there's a did you post all of the studies I gave you? Because one of them
will be in the so you guys can find the resources for this talk as well as the audio MP3 of this conversation on patreon.com/AnnaCherry in the next coming week or two. So make sure to follow that or become a patron. But you can go ahead and follow it.
So anyway, there are
all
nerve
of that
cells.
will be there.
Okay, good. There are nerve cells that they've proven that nerve cells actually respond to terahertz frequencies, and perhaps our brain might even use terahertz frequencies. But they're looking at
can neurons sense millimeter waves?
Right. And by the way, millimeter wave and terahertz, that's basically the same terminology. Because it just so happens that terahertz is around the size of 1 millimeter per wavelength. But anyway, so the point is that this frequency can impact brain cells and cause the activation pattern to change, and so there's a variety of issues going on here. But basically, there are effects on DNA, on the brain, basically all across. Biological molecules are very sensitive to terahertz range radiation. And so with this in mind, and you start looking at all of these various studies on many ways in which terahertz impacts biology, it is a fucking horror that the FCC, under a shit pie, has now approved the use of terahertz frequencies in all of these things. So the point is, right now, we may be safe with 5G, but all they got to do is flip the switch to go right to 6G, and we start just fucking nuking ourselves because we're not paying attention to this biological fact that is supported by massive amounts of evidence. And the people in technology are all about, wow, we'll be able to get so much more information packed into these higher frequencies. You know, it's so much better. We need to switch to that right away. And you got lots of articles about this without any consideration that there are tons and tons of articles and studies and things that show that that frequency is dangerous, and our goddamn regulatory agency has fucking already approved it. So how long do you think it's going to be before they take those satellites, and there's nowhere safe on Earth that you can get that you can go to get away from this fucking bombardment with with something that is extremely dangerous to your brain, to your and to your cells. It's mind blowing that we're just so damn disconnected that something this dangerous could end up happening from our fucking stupid greed. And we're not there yet, but somebody better start yelling loudly enough, saying, "Hey, those conspiracy theorists, they were grasping at something with the wrong information, but they hit upon something that was right. It's not 5G that's the problem. It is we're upgrading these things and allowing them where in corporate hands." They'll be able to make the decision on their own. Then there isn't even a regulatory agency that'll stop them from doing it.
Right.
There's more profit to be had in the higher bandwidth that will be available in 6G, and they will fucking turn it on. They'll just flip the damn switch because they created technology and they're launching that shit into space, and I guarantee you it can hit that frequency range as well. And so what we're dealing with is something that is just going to be fucking horrible if they do it. Just fucking horrible. And what are we doing about it? Nothing. Not a damn thing.
Well, what can we do, honestly?
Well, we can talk about it. We can talk about it and make sure people understand why. Because here's the thing.
So that's the thing.
Conspiracy theorists a lot of times end up muddying the waters because they don't have it. They sense something that they may be right about on some level, but then they accidentally become disinformation agents. They themselves, by transmitting the noise along with the signal and not being careful enough to say to people who are more concerned with making sure they don't get things wrong and giving them the proof, because they're not concerned enough with it, they end up creating disinformation and make truth look like lies by mixing it with a bunch of dumb shit. And so it's an intractable problem. You can't. You do have to have people who are more exploratory, who are more risk-taking, who go out there and find that information. But then you have to have some way of separating all the bullshit they collect along with the truth that they end up finding in there too. And so we're just at that transition point here as well, where there is some level of bullshit around saying, being scared of 5G, and hopefully not enough people have sniffed that out and heard conspiracy theorists about that enough that they'll actually look at it and say, it's just another fucking stupid conspiracy theory. No, it's not. There's hard fucking science and lots of just a huge volume of hard science around that this has strong indications and very direct proofs that this could be very, very fucking bad. And it's there's just not enough awareness of it. So all we can do is talk about it to some extent and talk about the mechanisms that make sense, that people can understand, so that they can spread it not through faith and just say, well, somebody said that this was bad, so I'm saying that it's bad because I trusted that they just said. No, you got to be able to understand it and convey something that makes sense. And so hopefully people will start doing that more, conveying the understanding of why it could be bad.
Well, that question about that is the MIT review. Weren't they? What were they talking about in there? I think that's important to bring up. Why were they talking about the dangers of terahertz in the first place? Where do we currently have those terahertz that break apart the DNA and cells?
You're talking about yeah. So what they're talking about is millimeter wave technology at airports. There is
frisk into living rooms and frisk people at a distance.
Yes. So people are using it to frisk at a distance, and so basically they are already using terahertz technology because it was approved by law enforcement, etc. And so they're already exposing us directly through the body scanners and through technologies that they're implementing for law enforcement. So that's they're the people who were up in arms about millimeter wave technology. They were right, and this needs to be. We need to put on the brakes until and unless a massive amount of counter evidence is found to show how it can be made safe in any way, because as it stands right now, there is lots of evidence that it is simply tremendously not safe at a lot of different levels.
So we're talking about here real quick how neurons can sense millimeter waves, aka terahertz. That's what the millimeter wave is, as Master mentioned, and Master Rawl over here. And we also have this interesting thing about 6G, aka the terahertz thing. Potential application for terahertz spectrum, including sensing, image, wireless cognition, all of these interesting extra senses that they're possibly talking about. So let's talk about Ingress.
Okay, now we're gonna get to the fun part.
Yeah.
Yay! Now for funsies and conspiracy theory silliness. Okay, so where do you want to start with that? 'Cause that's,
Anywhere you take it away.
okay, now we're going into the creative zone.
Exam, I guess.
Hopefully we've talked about this. We've said it enough times that people won't like fast forward to this point and think that we're very serious about anything we talk about from this point forward. But there are some funsies to be had with Ingress, and so I'm going to tell you some of the conspiracy theory, creativity, kind of fun stuff that can be explored with the whole Ingress lore. Okay, so if you don't know what Ingress is the game that was developed by what's his first name? Hankey. What was it again? John Hankey. So it was the game developed by John Hankey, who you might know as connected to the CIA in some way, and so it is what provided the infrastructure and data, etc., that eventually led to Pokemon Go. So Ingress is the precursor to Pokemon Go, and if you trace all this down to a certain extent, so John Hankey was he worked for, I think, the State Department or something. I forget exactly who he worked for, but he was in government and worked with foreign policy, and then basically as part of what he was working on, like he was actually a game developer as one of his first things, but then he was working on a project that eventually culminated in Google Earth. And that was all about mapping, and so part of the reason why he ended up getting funding from InQtel, which is that's basically a funding arm of the CIA. Why he got that funding is because it was at a time when we're still we were dealing with war, and so for helping war effort, we needed to be able to have mapping better, and so that ended up leading to better mapping technology, eventually Google Earth, and of course, so to some extent or another, some of it is probably still under control of the military and not 100% available to the public, as makes sense whenever you're attempting to have some level of security that within your war machine. So that's how Pokemon Go is related to the CIA, etc. Now, that seems, when you look at it a little more closely, it doesn't seem all that sinister that he got some funding to make a project in mapping, and then that eventually, because the truth of the matter is, he was a game developer first. He made some of the first. One of his games was the very first MMO. Even the term MMO, I forget what they called it, an MMOG or I don't know. The term MMO ended up being coined or solidified by someone else, but they had a term a lot like it. But it was he was one of the first developers of the whole MMO genre, and so he is kind of a gamer at heart, and so I don't see him in a sinister light like some of these articles end up kind of painting him because of the whole CIA funding money, because that is verifiable truth. The CIA was involved, etc. So now let's talk a little bit more about Ingress. So Ingress it is so fucking cool when it comes to the way that it was designed. He designed the game It was, by the way, it was supposed to be part of Google Glass. It was going to be like a.
It's a lot of what Niantic does, which is another fun story we'll get into about the name. John Hankey is the CEO of the company Niantic, which made Ingress, which made Pokemon Go, and some other Harry Potter game now. And Niantic, what did you just say?
Oh, I don't know. I was listening to you.
Right before that. Well, there's a reason why I mentioned Niantic, that it's that's the company that.
Okay, well, it's based on the ship Niantic, which was part of San Francisco.
Niantic is we'll get into that later. We're talking about AR. Niantic does augmented reality. That's their thing, which is why it was part of Google Glass because.
Oh, okay,
right,
yeah.
yes.
So it's going to be a flagship product for Google Glass.
Because their whole thing is AR.
And there's a great article that they. The title's clickbaity as hell.
You may need to resend that to me.
But I do need to
find
resend it because
Yeah.
it's this neat article about how these people who got into Ingress just really, really got into it. They even hid that they were Ingress players because the level of cloak and dagger that they have in Ingress is fucking great. I mean, reading about this story, I was happy as I could be about how it's kind of this own little hidden society where they play their own little cloak and dagger sort of thing and have a lot of fun with it. But I mean, we're talking about people literally flying all over the world to perform these certain these certain operations.
How the augmented reality game escalated into real world spy warfare?
Yes, and that article. And so that's they're not government spies, but they were basically spying on the different groups in the Ingress game, and the factions.
Two factions, really.
Apparently were spying on each other, and it's a fun story. Definitely should look into it. So there's people who are really geeking out. Ingress is way more geek out than Pokemon Go.
Oh my God, yes.
What?
No, it just is.
Yeah, it is. It's so.
Well, see, it's weird because Pokemon is its own kind of nerd.
Yeah.
Which is a Pokemon nerd, and it's not really a nerd. It's just Pokemon people because they had Pokemon when they were kids. It's their Pokemon. It's whatever. It's sort of like Star Wars nowadays. It's perfectly acceptable.
Right.
Ingress is your weeaboo conspiracy theory. The world hangs in the balance. Things aren't as they seem. You're a secret agent. It's so nerdy. I love it.
Oh, that's so great.
It's the best.
Then. Where was I going with this? Oh, so yeah, really recommend
Netflix.
Watching Netflix. Yeah, there's the Ingress anime on Netflix now. That was a lot of fun. I really recommend watching it because and one of the things is a lot of people are now going. So Ingress kind of died down a little bit because there is a little bit of a barrier to entry sort of thing, I suppose, because it is a little complex, and we haven't even played it that much yet.
No, you have to drive around, play. It's very intensive, much more than.
I could tell that, but I think there were some people who were specifically playing Ingress, not Pokemon Go, that we were noticing as we were driving around.
Sure were.
And and I didn't realize that there were people, and that's the neat thing about it. You don't know that there's people playing Ingress.
Because you're not doing any weird hand catching stuff. You're just looking at your phone.
Yep, exactly, and just
and tapping occasionally, like you would.
Yeah, you play it a little differently.
Yep.
And so Ingress players were more on the DL, and apparently, according to that story, a lot of people play Ingress and never tell anybody who's not an Ingress player that they play Ingress. So it's the cloak and dagger part is what gets me excited about it. It sounds like so much fucking fun. But so the watch the anime. It provides a lot of the storyline. But one of the neatest things is the Ingress storyline started out as the whole idea was how AR is mixing reality with the virtual. Their storyline is purposefully mixing reality with the virtual. And so the storyline itself, so they started disseminating lore in these little pieces, and the whole background of Ingress is that it's real. That's that's the lore of Ingress is that the game is just a cover, and what's going on is the real reality. And so let's see, where was it going with this? The
XM and
okay. So I guess I can give it a little bit. So there's this idea that XM is this thing that from ancient times, this exotic matter, has been boiling up out of the earth at these various places, and so all these shrines and stuff like that are holy places. Well, all of them are part of this XM network where these fountains of XM kind of come up, and XM has effects on the mind. Is this starting to sound familiar and connected to what we were talking about before? And so the XM network, part of what you do in Ingress is that there's these two factions. One's the resistance, and the other is the Enlightenment. And there's this idea that there's kind of this force from outside that the Enlightenment believes is entirely for helping humanity reach like the next level of their evolution, and then the resistance believes that this is some dangerous force manipulating mankind, and what the resistance does is they try to manipulate mankind in opposition to this other manipulation, whereas the Enlightenment is more about letting it happen and things like that. So there are these two factions, and you can see a wide variety of reasons why different people with different belief sets would organize themselves into these two things. And it actually, the funny thing is, I've got this post that I want to put on Reddit and stuff as part of to tell this whole story of lore and things like that. That you can see that it can be related to Gnosticism and the ideas of the aeons and the archons in that myth. So there's this. It's a neat storyline, and so how does this end up becoming kind of conspiracy theory? Well, you can see it as there really are, when you go into, and this will be in my post, I'll eventually get it up somewhere, but there really is these groups of people, like there's something called the gateway process. You can look that up in CIA's declassified documents, where they're attempting to access certain like knowledge elsewhere. There's the remote viewing project you probably heard about. That was also part of the government, and there was declassified remote viewing stuff, and they had like the gateway process is really in depth into like actual science about Bowman Pribram's model of holographic mind, which is a computational methodology. It's a real computational methodology that is a theory for how brains really work. And so there's all of these aspects of mind control that the various states have been trying to use for many, many years. I mean, the CIA director in 1981 said that our disinformation program will be complete, or successful?
Successful.
We
know that we have.
We'll only know it's successful once everything that the American public believes is false. Now, you can look this up. This actually happened, and there's a reasonable explanation for why he would say such a thing, and that is specifically there is the idea that they're fighting against this evil force, the Russians, because that was that kind of that era still, Cold War era, and the idea is that the Russians were constantly getting tons and tons of information, crucial information, through local news sources. Local news sources were reporting enough information about critically important subjects and topics going on in everything from politics to science, etc. And so therefore that was a major leak. And this was kind of the talk that there was the context around him saying this. And so therefore the only reasonable way you can plug that leak is by making sure that you put out enough disinformation that everything that everybody believes is complete bullshit. And so therefore you've plugged the problem of keeping the enemy from knowing what's going on. You have to make sure that people don't know what's going on so that they can't leak it to them. So there's a method to their madness. It's not all sinister. I mean, these people, they have good intentions. The CIA director was not just some mustache twiddling villain. He had a reason why he was protecting people by keeping them ignorant. Mm-hmm. And so there is this whole exploration of mind control. Now that goes all the way back to Hitler, and he was practicing hand motions, and his various things about mind control. There's always going to be a tremendous amount of interest in mind control within the government. There's always going to be that. And so anytime that we're starting to develop these technologies that deal with understanding the human brain better, creating AI, all of these things then immediately have the potential to be abused for mind control, because a lot of people don't realize how close we are to understanding enough about the human mind to be able to manipulate it. Like, for instance, at Carnegie Mellon, I've been reporting on this repeatedly. At Carnegie Mellon, they have, and now this is real, this is true. I'm not, you can look this up yourself. That they're able to, by just using a little bit of calibration, you give them 3 words, 3 nouns. Then you can think of any noun, and across various subjects, anywhere from 80 to like 95% accuracy, they could read a noun that you thought of. So they basically, this is using an fMRI. So the areas of the brain that you access upon thinking about that particular noun could then be read as specific information in the brain. Now you can also, using certain types of waves, activate areas of the brain and cause it to do it. So basically, if you know where the areas of the brain are, if you can read the specific nouns, then you can then make those nouns be activated through certain types of fairly what's called non-invasive. In other words, projecting waves into the brain. You can cause those things to occur. And so there are now, that's not mind control, just being able to at most it would make you think of a particular subject, but I'm only telling you about the older technology. Since then,
Revealed technology.
right? Well, not just that. The Carnegie Mellon has continued down that path further, and now they can read entire sentences. Reading entire sentences is a whole additional layer, because it's not just a collection of words. It has its own other information it's connected to via context.
Right.
And so there is meaning attached to it. So it's more than the sum of its parts. You can't just randomly arrange a sentence and it still have meaning. And so now that they've been able to start reading sentences, now you're talking about being able to basically broadcast, more robust ideas into a person's mind. But truthfully, the technology requires you'd have to basically put on a helmet or maybe Google Glass, whichever. That's the conspiracy theory part there, is that I was hoping to put upon or to access.
Yeah.
What's the word I'm looking for here? Is the idea that Google Glass matches in the Ingress anime the mind control technology, because basing on using
this whole time when they said Hulong goggles, I'm like, Google Glass the whole time.
Really, you were thinking Google Glass
the whole time, and just now you said that they actually worked for stuff for Google Glass, and I was like, no, it can't be, because Google are nice guys. The Ingress wouldn't talk shit about Google.
So the thing is, you would literally have to. It's not feasible to broadcast anything into somebody's mind from a distance because of the various angles and the positioning, and that's just not feasible. You would have to wear some sort of helmet, etc., to be able to have any kind of concepts broadcast directly into your mind as a brain interface. But the funny thing is, that's why I'm calling on the idea of the Google Glass, because it's actually one of the areas of your brain that have to do with morality, specific morality, moral choices,
I know where you're going with this.
as well as social things, is called the right temporal parietal junction. And in that area, there are certain social interactions as well as morality deciders that you can alter on a person, and they've already proven that you can alter this in people from the outside with just electromagnetism.
Yep.
And that you wear a Google Glass on your right ear. So anyway, so that's the fun, delving into conspiracy theory silliness, because the likelihood that this is, that they were actually doing that, I think that's just, I think that's nonsense personally. But it's still fun. I mean, look at these connections. These are cool. These, and I think that Niantic knows. I think the people at Niantic know some of these things that I'm talking about.
I mean,
and that's why they're making
without
this
giving
funny
away
story.
too much of the anime. I mean, the glyphs.
Oh yeah.
The concepts that they download
go
into
to
your mind.
Here's something I haven't even told you yet. The Google Glass YouTube channel, the symbol on it is a glyph.
Oh my god.
It's a fucking glyph. No, they're doing it on purpose. They're fucking doing it on purpose.
Well, they're trolling Google.
Yeah, no, Google Glass. And Ingress, their connection, all of these things. Go to the Google Glass.
Yeah, but Google Glass is no longer they're no longer connected.
You see the A there?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have that A, and it looks. It's
but
a glyph
Niantic
from
and
the
Google
fucking
Glass
Niantic.
have nothing to do with each other.
Oh no, they do.
They just worked together at one point.
Right, it was meant to be a flagship product.
But it isn't anymore. So
I don't know what's going on with that because Google Glass halted.
Exactly, which is why Niantic is trolling Google.
Yeah, well, they're using it as part of. Here's the thing: they're artfully weaving together reality and fiction, and it's
speculation,
and to make it into this really fun background story for the game.
Yeah.
And they're doing a fantastic job at hinting at things that people can research and find out for themselves. And so it's just like it's the depth that you can go with this is much greater than a lot of people recognize. So anyway, so Niantic before this point they've been talking about like the XM was discovered at CERN and it was the Niantic project and and they had all of this. What was that thing where people like filmed themselves and they were scared in the woods and it was the first version of it?
The Blair Witch.
Blair Witch Project. Okay, so they kind of did this blogger, talking about XM and vlogger, whatever, vlogger talking about XM and having these experiences. And when you try to, it's actually kind of hard to find all of the lore. Like you find layers of the lore around Niantic. And Ingress
YouTube page is up.
Yeah. So it's so much fun because it's got all these little pieces of reality that
so many kernels.
That in my opinion
kernels that you could get a whole bucket of popcorn.
Right. In my opinion, it's a false pattern. You can put together this pattern as a conspiracy theory, but I think it's just a fun little game. It's the truth of the matter is, there are these explorations.
I don't know, man. We don't know what DARPA's holding back in interest of.
I know, especially with my knowledge level of how the brain works and how you can actually access certain things. It looks a lot more plausible to me than it would to most people. But I still I'm still I don't think that there's any reality to it. But it's so much fun because of the fact that it can look so real. And that's what that's what excites me about it. It's like oh my god, what a great job that they've done, and maybe they've done such a good job that you have to be a researcher in things like mind control and neuroscience and all of those sorts of things to even see how well they've done their job of creating this backstory. And they've purposefully left little hints and little like the vlogger videos and all these videos of like these scientific experiments that you can look online for. That's all the part of this Niantic story. So anyway, so the whole, I just love how well they've done this, and it's just I'm blown away that it's such this like well done conspiracy theory picture that they've created that does resonate with the reality of the fact that there is mind control sorts of warfare that really do happen in reality. They really do, but it's just and so I don't know, maybe it is kind of a little bit of a metaphor that there is they're somewhat of a psychic battle, which is just basically propaganda and things like that. Those things are real, and so it's kind of a metaphor for that. So it makes basically they take that and make it too specific then that's what conspiracy theories are.
Right.
A lot of times is you're recognizing that there are things going on, right, and you're making it too specific, and that specifically the game is this, and specifically there are these forces that specifically do. So the conspiracy theory is taking specifics and applying them to something that is real, and there is a real pattern of there are people trying to do things. How successful they are, not very. There's not a lot of success to their mind control techniques. There's a tremendous amount of failure to it, and like I brought up the fact that that the 6G terahertz technology could impact the brain. Well, it's only going to impact the brain. The level of difficulty in attempting to do anything mind control is so beyond even our current highest level best technology. The best you can do. Why even try to implant an idea in somebody's brain through them wearing Google Glass when you could just have commercials on TV?
I was about to say just say it in a McDonald's jingle.
You're doing the same thing, basically. So you can't really, as it stands right now, even with the very best, most cutting edge technology, the most mind control you can do is equivalent to influencing TV and movies and shit like that, which they already do. So it's like it's not, the mind control technology is not any better than that.
Right.
But it does make for a fun fucking story, and that's what I'm geeking out about. Is that the story itself is so much fun because it has this, that it plays upon people's darkest fears and and our fear of technology and technology advancement and so it has this creepy factor, and they were going for that creepy factor and the and this fear of technology and all those sorts of things, and so I appreciate a job well done.
As the exotic matter, the XM, it was discovered at CERN.
Yeah, those evil people at CERN with their science. They're gonna destroy the world.
so to leave off with a little cherry on top, let's talk about Niantic, because that's such an interesting name. And the other cute part about Ingress is they're talking about the National Intelligence Association or something, NIA, and they're calling themselves the Niantic company is putting themselves into Ingress as somebody who is holding back information and acting as a running interference and being a CIA type, NSA, CIA, NIA.
Yeah,
but
I know, it's great.
Niantic, they are, and so what's Niantic? Tell us about the story of the name and the.
Oh, you just like that story? Okay,
yeah,
so
I love that story.
Oh well, okay. So I looked into because I wanted to do a little more deep research because it's fun. It's both fun and it's related to real topics, and so that why not? And so go to find out what Niantic meant. I wanted to find out
everything about it.
was there anything really actually sinister about Hankey's connection to the CIA? In my opinion, is no, it's not actually sinister, and it's
which is not opinions we usually hold about the CIA.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean the connection. I mean his connection. I mean the CIA is always sinister. I mean any war force, there's a sinister side to them. I mean that's basically that's reality. Every government agency that is about war for any country is sinister in some way. So anyway, but looking at his connection to it, I was like, okay, so what's this Niantic thing? And so it turns out that what the Niantic is a ship that started. It got its namesake is a Native American people that basically got wiped out in the somewhere along the eastern seaboard. I forget, it's like Pennsylvania maybe.
Yes,
I don't know.
Pennsylvania.
So it's a group of Indians, is the Niantic people, and so it was the ship was named after that, and it was the first ship to bring people who were going to be offloaded for the gold rush. So the gold rush that happened in California actually started.
The family lived in Pennsylvania, and they honored the natives by
it's the Cleveland family who owned the Niantic, and so they were, it was a whaling vessel at the time, I believe. It was created for trade with the East, then ended up being a whaling vessel, and then during its last trip it went through the Panama Canal, from what I understand, or at least it was around Panama, and because was the Panama Canal just widened during that era? I don't even know. That's a part of history I'm not very familiar with. Anyway, so it was.
Because how do you go by ship from the East Coast?
Right. So was the Panama Canal
to the
always
West Coast?
there? Because I know we did all this work on it. So was it always just like a smaller
it's right
canal
below
that was always
Mexico.
there?
Right.
Yeah.
It separates Mexico, North and South Mexico.
Well, not Mexico. It's
North and South America.
North and South America.
But I know Mexico's right there. I thought I bifurcated Mexico.
I know we widened it out, but I just didn't. I did not know it actually existed before being created.
Right.
And it seems as though from this story that it was there beforehand, and it's just somehow or another that's just a missing part of my history. Anyway. So it was around Panama, picked a bunch of people up there. Like they had like 3 people in the captain's quarters that were passengers, just filled the ship up. And then when it got to port, everybody deserted so quickly that they couldn't even unload it fully. They never even were able to unload it fully because the crew members deserted for the gold rush. And it was the first ship to bring people for the gold rush. And they ended up having to sell it, park it in dry dock, and it became the Niantic Hotel. Now, the Niantic Hotel is a centerpiece of San Francisco history because of the fact that it burned down multiple times and was rebuilt. They ended up finding like all these casks of wine still in the bottom of it.
Nice.
After rebuilding it. I think one of the like maybe it was like the 1980s or something as recently is that they found yet another cask of wine down in the depths of the wreckage when they started like having to rebuild it yet again. And so the Niantic Hotel is this kind of a central point in the history of San Francisco. And so it's just a neat little thing, and that's why the Niantic ship is, when you look at the Niantic Corporation, it has this ship as part of its logo and all that because of this connection to the Niantic. I'm not sure why that you like that story so much. I mean, I guess it's neat little bit of history.
It's so cool. And the fact that it's like an actual piece, it's like a hotel, it's a real thing that is currently in San Francisco. That was a ship, is now a building, and before that it brought the gold rush. Is so cool.
Yeah, it is neat. I enjoyed it too.
Yeah,
so.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, there's a reason I went and looked it all up. So
maybe it's because I was eating that super addictive fish when you were telling me about it.
So anyway, the point is that they ended up weaving a story, and I think it's Hankey's love of creating a story world, because you see, like I said, he was one of the progenitors of the whole MMO genre, and so I think that his influence on making the augmented reality is that he was marrying, and I think that very few people have been able to see what a masterpiece this game was, because the masterpiece is really in weaving this story of what's going on in reality and something digital, something artificial, and because that's what augmented reality is supposed to be.
I think the show really helps.
Yeah, the show really will help you. If you watch the anime on Netflix, it's like
it's new.
It's right up there. It's new, and so they're putting it in.
It's just
your
called
face.
Ingress, Netflix original.
Yeah, exactly. It's very good. But this weaving of
it's
augmented reality. That's the whole meaning of augmented reality, and he's doing it on 2 layers. He's doing it on the taking something fictional and connecting it,
augmenting reality,
and overlaying it with real reality. And a lot of people just aren't aware of how. And I'm surprised how much he knows about.
And
this
all the
sort
characters
of technology and stuff
in Ingress operate on augmented reality too, because the world's not what it seems.
Yep. So anyway, I've got a post that I've been trying to put on.
Redditors, signal
Reddit
boost,
and I just haven't
call
been
to
able
action.
I can't Reddit. Apparently, I can't. I even asked a question. It's like, okay, so I've contacted the moderators and done my due diligence of trying to figure out how to make this work, and nobody's gotten back to me. And like one post actually went through where I just asked, are there any hidden rules on this? Unwritten rules on this place? And they're like, no. And then I posted another. It was just like, okay, so what are my next steps to post in this, in this group? That didn't get through. That also was deleted automatically. So it's like, holy shit! How do I just post this lore thing in here? That thing I think people will like. I just want to post this damn lore. No dice so far. So. So I'm still going that, but hopefully I'll be able to add to the story, because I've got all this cool information about mind control tech and physics and shit like that I've woven together to add to the whole Ingress lore that should add a dimension to it that continues to connect all of these subjects and maybe make people more aware of how well Ingress is kind of a metaphor, and that it's a neat story. That's just a project that I'd like to launch if they'd let me.
Yep. That would be cool if we could one day maybe post it on Reddit.
Yes, if I could ever actually just be allowed to post. That's all. I just want to post. Can I do that? Apparently not.
I don't understand why. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know how to Reddit.
What? You can't post anything unless you got enough credit, and you can't
karma.
get credit unless you post. I mean, is that what the karma, whatever? Can't get
Must be
karma
credit.
unless you post. You can't post unless you have karma. Okay, cool. So this is basically unusable. Got it. You can never start.
That's what it seems like so far. So we're a bit frustrated with Reddit, but welcome any and all help we can have with that.
Yes.
So we just want to post this damn thing.
Yeah.
It's
That's
gonna be
part of
cool.
the reason why I never used Reddit before. Every time I go to Reddit, I get turned off by this. It's like, okay, so I can't do anything here, and people are generally like, one of my experiences with Reddit has always been like
Shitty people.
super hyper rude or just totally high school.
Yeah.
They're like they say some one line. Everything's about trying to get the coolest one liner, man. Yeah, that it has no meaning or value or anything, but it does get a giggle at somebody else's expense. It's like, Jesus, can we get out of high school? I mean,
So
make it
juvenile.
to make it past that just a hair, just a little.
Nope.
I don't know, but I think that's any online community, you're going to have a lot of those people, and they end up being the vocal minority and
Right.
aren't necessarily representative. And so it's like, can I meet some of the people who are the cool people of Reddit? I mean, I'd like to meet them. I keep running into the trolls
Right.
instantly. They're there. They're waiting. They're ready with their their quick little quips to try to get a laugh at somebody's expense for every person who wants to start to be in that community.
They're
They're
just
the
that sad
gatekeepers.
and insecure.
Yes.
It's pretty. That breaks my heart, man.
But they're probably a vocal minority, if I were to guess. That's usually your worst first impression that you get of any group is usually the minority,
The vocal
the
minority.
vocal minority that every group wishes would not consider themselves part of their
Represent
group.
them. Yeah.
Please stop representing us, please.
So true. That's actually really, really true if I think about it.
No, any group that
Even groups that I belong to, I'm like, oh, I wish.
any group that, and all the groups that you might dislike, typically they have a vocal minority that the larger
like
group
Big
is
Red.
going, please stop, please shut up, oh my God, you're not a representative of our group.
Yeah. But then, of course, that's where we get into the true Scotsman fallacy, where,
No true Scotsman, yes.
because some groups really do all believe in evil
Yeah.
shit, but not
Yeah,
all.
Yeah.
Thing is, that's never all. There's always exceptions.
Yeah, I'd like to believe the best of people first and give them lots of chances to
Prove you wrong.
to disabuse me of that notion.
Indeed. That's how we roll. Alrighty, so I believe I'll be taking us out of here. Let's see if we can get a little music going to play us out. And let's see. Or not. Okay, here we go.
Oh, maybe we should do a little, look through and see if there's any questions from chat.
I've been paying attention.
Oh, you've been thinking about it? Great. Alright, yeah, somebody handle Carnegie Mellon. Okay, that's cool.
Alrighty, once again, this broadcast has been brought to you by patrons and listeners such as yourself. Check out patreon.com/AnnaCherry. And
Thanks
for all of
so
you
much to our patrons.
loyal patrons, we'll see you in just a minute. Okay, we're muted now. But the sound's still going. I need to have a stream ending screen.
I would assume that means that they can hear what we're saying.
Huh. Oh, I'm an idiot. Ha.